Are you married or in a committed relationship looking for real advice on having love and enriching your relationship? You are in the right place. Welcome to The Couples Expert with Stuart Fensterheim.
Hi guys, and welcome back to the podcast. This is Stuart Fensterheim, The Couples Expert. I am thrilled to be here with you today because I want to talk about something today. I got up this morning and it was a pretty good day. I got up, I got the paper, we walked our dog Jack. Some of you know I just recently adopted him. And my wife was getting up, getting ready to go to church. And one of the things that she does every weekend is she cooks for her parents who we visit on Sundays. She's very dedicated to them. And it's really a wonderful quality of hers. And I've mentioned this to you before. And I'm not just trying to blow my horn for her, because today it wasn't so good. What happened today is we just recently got back from Chicago, and she bought something that she needed to cook stew. And every morning right before she goes to church, she gets up, she does a little bit of cooking because she does this Meals on Wheels for her parents. And she couldn't find something. Now, what you have to know about my wife is that she is one of the more organized people you ever know. Me, on the other hand, I am both absent-minded and also not the most organized. She helps me in this, but today she couldn't find one of the ingredients she needed to cook the stew. And she immediately turned to me and said, "Where'd you put it?" I immediately became quite defensive because this is an issue that's come up before, where I do take things and I put them places that sometimes doesn't make a lot of sense. So I became quite defensive because, quite honestly, I didn't want to acknowledge that I likely am the one that moved the item that she put down. And I didn't want her to see me as scattered. So that defensiveness, that feeling, triggered me. And I began to pretty much start trying to shift the responsibility to her. Now, why would I do that? I did that because the last thing I want is her to see me as not available to her and as someone that causes her distress. That is a real passion of mine. I teach that as a couples counselor, and here I am now living an experience with her that doesn't have the two of us having each other's back. Now that trigger, that situation could have blown us out of the water for a very long time a number of years ago. But the two of us have done the work. Part of what I want this podcast and this episode to be is a demonstration to all of you is what you need to do so a situation like that doesn't blow you out of the water, has you staying connected in spite of a conflict, in spite of a bump in the road that may have to do with a little can of spaghetti sauce. Here's the situation, though. It's 7 o'clock in the morning. The last thing I want is our day to just go like that. So we sit down and we process this. And fortunately, and I feel very fortunate to be able to say this, fortunately, my wife and I have done a lot of work on our relationship, and both of us come at this as two adults talking about the fact that, number one, having her just pile these things up are going to just drive me into a very bad place. And number two, she doesn't want that. I don't want that. And we were able to sit down rather quickly, talk it out, come to a place where we both say, I love you, I love you. This is what we're going to do to make this okay for us right now. And we changed the channel. And by the time I left to come do this podcast, because I'm recording this probably 2 hours after this interaction, we're okay. Now, here's the funny part. Well, maybe not so funny, but here's the other part that happened that I think just really solidified that we're okay. So I'm supposed to come to the office to do this podcast, and my wife's on her way to church. And about 5 or 10 minutes before I was supposed to leave, my phone rings. It's her. And she goes, "Oh, shit, I have your car keys." And I'm turning around and I'm coming back because I know you were going to look for them. It'll drive you crazy not being able to find these. And she made the decision not to go to church, not to go in and say, "You're going to have to wait for me." But she turned around, came back, walked in the door, gave me the keys. I wasn't even upset about the whole situation because down deep, what I know more than anything, and as a result of this dialogue that occurred earlier in the morning, a conflict that occurred that ended well, there's forgiveness and there's these tokens that I've talked about before that allowed me and her to come at this, and I felt really loved. I felt loved by the fact that we had this conflict. As a matter of fact, I believe I felt more loved because we did have the conflict, and the fact that she was then giving to me by turning around, didn't want me to wait there because it's a Sunday. I have no other plans but this podcast. So it could have been, just wait for me, I'll be done at 10. But no, she didn't do that because she knew how important this was to me. She was able to access those emotions in spite of the fact that we had this conflict. The conflict, in essence, had disappeared. It wasn't even on either of our barometers. It wasn't something that we were even thinking about because we have done the work that we needed to have conflicts, fight for what we need to fight, and then move on. That's the power of what we're going to be talking about today. Because I've titled this podcast Arguing 101 because it's the basic foundation for how do you have arguments. I even hate the word conflict, by the way. How do you deal with your triggers? How do you deal with the issues that come up and be able to just let them go after the two of you have talked? And part of what we need to understand is that there's been a tremendous amount of research on some of this, on how do you do this? What does it take? What's a good fight look like? How do you go from two people who are at odds with one another and just have it be about how much you love each other? One of the statements that I have said to clients, and I believe I've said more time than I care to, and you probably are sick of me saying this, but I wanted to get into your brains really loud and clear that fighting is never an issue for most couples. When you have conflicts, when you have arguments, if you look at your relationship and you go, "Gosh, we fight so much. It's really painful of how much we fight." I don't want that to be the measure. I don't want you guys to measure how frequently you have conflicts. Why do you fight so much? I want you to begin to ask yourself, are we a couple who repair? Because all the research does show this. Couples who argue and fight and repair, those couples don't report being dissatisfied with the relationship. Now, if we take the flip side of that, couples who do have conflicts and don't repair are very dissatisfied with the relationship. Now, what the research has shown us, and what I'm going to do today, is I'm going to give you a little bit of the background and the theory. From there, what we're going to do is I'm going to give you some tips, some suggestions from what we've learned and how successful couples argue and have conflicts different than others. And the last part of this will be some specific tips for you guys to take with you and to try and see how it goes. What I want to also say is this podcast is not going to really delve deeply into this. It's going to be a general discussion because I don't have time to really go deep. But what I always do, and I want to remind all of you of this, when we have a podcast like this one, there will be blogs and articles, and you can go on LinkedIn and go to Pulse. We're going to be sending articles that I've written on this topic to give you more information on this subject. So be prepared for that. I actually did a Facebook Live on the appropriate way of doing a timeout on March 9th at 11 o'clock Arizona time. So if you go to my Facebook page, which is Stuart Fensterheim's Facebook page, you will be able to see that Facebook Live where I break down all the steps that go into a timeout if conflict is really getting a bit out of control. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the podcast.
This episode is sponsored by Stuart's Daily Notes. Stuart's Daily Notes is an email newsletter from the couples expert that will improve your marriage in 5 minutes a day. Small things can have a big impact on your relationship over time. Sign up for Stuart's Daily Notes. It's a resource of tools, videos, exercises, and more. All done by the couples expert, Stuart Fensterheim, with 30 years of clinical experience working with couples. Delivered straight to your inbox. The best part about it, it's free. Sign up today. Go to www.thecouplesexperts.com and change your relationship every single day of your life together.
Now back to the episode. The most important thing to keep in mind is that all the studies that we've had about arguments as couples show that those couples that are comfortable with conflict, and that those previous studies that we've had that says people who fight a lot have an unhappy marriage, they didn't really look at the kind of fights that it was. That the study shows that there are certain kinds of fights that absolutely improve marriages. And if you have an argument that the end result of the argument is actually nurturing the relationship, that those couples report a very secure marriage. It's secure because there's a clear sense that no matter what comes up, whether we're upset with each other or not, we're able to handle it. We're able to really address anything. So when we talk about having an authentic marriage, an authentic relationship, authenticity isn't always easy. If you have an authentic marriage, it means that there are going to be times authentically that you're pissed with each other, that it doesn't go so well. And that the study also showed the most productive arguments are those in which each partner felt free to be angry, felt that they were understood by their partner why they were angry, and that the two of them came to a resolution with some degree of compromise, as you can imagine. These things give the couple a strong sense that you can weather the storm together. And this is one of the things that I believe very strongly. Couples who have done the work, couples who are really working on feeling close and vulnerable with one another, and that's the basic ingredient of your marriage, of your relationship, that what your fights more often than not are about is we're fighting for closeness. That when my wife felt upset with me that I may have lost the sauce packet, why she was upset wasn't about the sauce packet, because what she recognized and what she recognizes is that it is really hard for her to feel close to me if it doesn't feel like I care about the things that matter to her, and not being able to find things is a really difficult thing for her. So her interpretation of me at those times is, you don't care. And the last thing she wants to feel is the lack of caring about her husband. And quite frankly, part of that goes back to her history with her previous marriage where she had someone in her life that didn't care about her enough. That hurt her deeply. So those emotions get triggered based on a lost stew packet sauce. Now, you might say that's somewhat ridiculous, and it might be. I can see someone believing that, but I would suggest to you that doesn't matter because it's my wife. It's someone I love. I don't want her ever, ever, ever to have any thought like that. If that comes up, I have to be willing to acknowledge and let her know in everything that I do that it matters to me that she feels bad right now. Whether it was my fault or not, I want her to know that I care about her experience. Now, let me give you a little bit from this study about what it found to be the most frequent destructive maneuvers during a fight. So when the conflict is going on, what are the things that will hurt your relationship, not help them? The first one is, which you probably won't be surprised by, is any form of defensiveness or making excuses instead of taking responsibility for the problem. I could say that in a lot of ways, both of us were doing that. The next is telling your partner what one wants the other to stop doing instead of telling them what you want them to do. To attribute interpretations and motives and feelings on the other person. Now, what we know about relationship cycles, as we've talked about before, that's one of the basic things that happens when you're caught up in a negative cycle. If your relationship is having these negative cycles, you will make the worst interpretation of your partner based on their behavior and their actions and how you're seeing them. If you're stubborn, that'll get in the way. So if that's the case, you're going to have to work on that. Insults or critical character assassinations do not help a relationship. They don't help you become a loving, caring partner where two people, even when they're upset with one another, still can feel and recognize the love. If either one of you tends to be cynical or hostile toward the world in general, not just in the relationship, but are you someone that sees the world as not a great place, that's going to work against you. And I highly recommend, if that's who you are, that you have to do some work on this. Because if you see everything from a dark place, a half-empty place, as opposed to a half-full place, when something goes on between you and your partner, you're going to see it in the same way. Okay. The other things that quite often come up, and one of the things we've talked about before, and if we talk about arguing, we have to talk about this, is being able to identify the triggers and where they come from. Sometimes they don't come from your partner, but they come from your family background, past relationships, social difficulties, things that happened when you were a kid. And the more the two of you can talk about this, the better it's going to be. You want to have this relationship to be one in which these conflicts, when resolved, make your relationship stronger and stronger and stronger. Now, I'm about to say something here that is going to sound sexually biased. But what we know is that most men are not ones that jump right in and say, let's talk about things. Are you guys? The women tend to be the ones that are the emotional barometer for your marriage, for your relationship. And they are the ones that we need to trust that if our wives are upset with us, we have to stay present. It's going to feel like you're maneuvering landmines sometimes. But the most important key here is that you and I have to be able to listen attentively, letting our partners know that we care about their experience and that we acknowledge that there's something that needs to be dealt with. And if you're upset at the same time, you get to say that. It's okay to share with them that you're upset about something too, but you have to send the message that you care about their emotional experience at the time they're upset, and that there's nothing more important than you giving them your undivided attention about their feelings, their experience, without dismissing it. One of the best ways to do this is when we restate the problem as our partners share, and what will de-escalate the problem rather quickly, almost like a snap, is when you're able to restate to your partner what they're upset about and let them know that you're not looking for a solution. You're not going to try to fix it for them, although a solution is something that you're willing to talk about, how to make her feel better. But the most important piece is to let your wives know that you care about their experience and how they're feeling. And that when you do this on a regular basis, what ends up happening is there's a deep feeling of understanding that you have about each other, and that these fights, these arguments, actually make your relationship stronger, more secure, and it clarifies how much you care about one another. So, what do successful couples do that others don't? Number one, they don't run from fights. Couples that are in it for the long haul don't shy away from topics. There are no multiple things that are on the shelf that we agree to disagree and not talk about. You have to have a relationship in which you don't run from the fight and you're willing to talk about whatever is bothering either one of you. The other thing that you do is you start slow. If you're someone that immediately goes from 0 to 100, that's not going to work well. So you have to start out these conflicts with the idea that both of you are interested in making things feel better and that you want to hear each other and that you take turns talking. I can't tell you how many couples interrupt each other, aren't even listening, and that's half your battle. So what I want you to do, if you're a couple that does this, and it's going to sound silly, but use a talking stick. I used to work on a Native American reservation, and they did this pretty routinely. There was something that they held, that's the person that had the floor. And then he passed it to the next person if they wanted to talk. You need to be in a relationship that is blame-free, and most importantly, is not about calling each other any names. The other thing that couples who are successful know how to do is really knowing how to cool yourself down. And that's where the timeouts come in. So check out my Facebook Live when I did on timeouts. You'll see there's an actual clear method of how to do that if you need to. And the thing about timeouts, just so you know, timeouts don't solve a problem. It de-escalates the relationship at the time that it's happening. No one likes a timeout, but timeouts sometimes are necessary for this exact reason, so you cool down. And that there are certain ground rules that the two of you have for arguments. And that should be no divorce threats, especially. No talking about anyone other than the two of you. I can't believe your mom raised you that way, or things like that. You're going to really have certain rules, and the rules are no low blows. The other rule that should always be part of your relationship is that nobody other than the two of you gets to know about your fights. That there's a confidentiality about your arguments. So if you're still upset with your partner, you don't get to pick up the phone and call your brother, mother, best friend and start ragging on your partner. And along with that is you acknowledge each other's point of view and you give each other the benefit of the doubt. So what I want to end with today is a couple of specific tips. When you have a conflict, and if the importance of the conflict is resolution and feeling good, one of the things that we need to know is a great deal of self-awareness. As I talked about earlier, part of this is about being able to identify where the feelings are coming from. And that means you have to know your own feelings. And for some people, that's a big struggle. And if that's part of the picture here, I highly recommend that you either do some work individually with a therapist or with someone to really help you identify. Sometimes it's books or workshops or readings to really allow yourself to understand where you're coming from and where these feelings originate from. Because the more you can do that, the more you'll be able to separate whether you're upset at your partner or some trigger that occurred emotionally. I want you to keep in mind that anger is emotion and it's neither right nor wrong. What that means is that when we are upset with our partners, it's just a feeling. It's a feeling that can be resolved if you are in a relationship where people are talking about these things. Then more often than not, it stays on a very even keel. It doesn't get over the top. You want to have and pin down a time and a place to talk about these things. So often, I think part of the challenge, particularly if we have children and all these things that are going on in our lives, part of the difficulty is that we pick a time that's really, really bad to do this. If the kids are around, that's not going to work. You need to have each other's undivided attention. If the Super Bowl is on the television, don't ask your partner to talk about an issue. You know they're not going to be attentive. We have to be good at picking the right time. One of the more important ones is you need to stick to the subject. So often what happens for people is they start with one subject and they end up talking about 3 or 4 subjects and none of them get resolved. So what you want to do is a really good job at sticking to the subject. Sometimes I suggest to some couples, you got to jot down what you're talking about and know that that's what it's going to be about. State the issue that you're upset about clearly and honestly. Make sure that you give each other feedback and clarification on what's upsetting you. The other thing that goes without saying, obviously, is don't try to deal with conflict and arguing about an issue when there's any kind of substance abuse involved. All of these things that I've talked about today is totally thrown out the window if there's any significant substance abuse or domestic violence in your relationship. I want to be clear about that these things are not going to work. If those are issues, you absolutely have to get in to see a counselor. And it's a whole different approach that I would use if those issues are part of the picture. This is one that I want to make sure I mention. In a relationship where 2 people are close and care about one another, one of the things that may occur when you're resolving issues is that tears may be part of the picture. And that's really hard for a lot of people. But I think that there is a difficulty with some couples where they don't respect the crying and they use these tears and these emotions as a way to strike back. And it is a really destructive thing to do to a relationship. I want you to see that crying is a valid response to how we feel about things. And there's been studies about tears and how the chemical component of a tear actually can help the emotions, and it allows people to really process in such a different way because of a release of some of the chemicals that is a healthy response to an unhappy event. However, you don't want to let the tears sidetrack from being able to have the dialogue. So more and more, if the 2 of you come at this together, you're going to have a relationship that is solidified by the conflicts that occur, the ability to let your partners know that you care about their experience, that it matters to you how they feel, and that both of you want to have the relationship continue to be one in which there is a feeling of forgiveness when needed, the love is there, and the 2 of you are having a relationship that doesn't let anything get in the way of how close you feel each other, and that if there is something that truly is interrupting or interfering with how you feel about each other, that you're willing to talk about it, you're willing to heal the relationship by sending the right message, and that the 2 of you are in this relationship together because of how important you are to one another. and that no topic, no issue, no disagreement, no stew sauce will ever tear the two of you apart. Take care. We'll talk to you again next week, and stay connected. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. This episode has ended, but your journey continues. Head over to www.thecouplesexperts.com to access all the links and resources mentioned in this episode, as well as bonus content exclusive to podcast listeners. Enjoyed this episode? Why not hit subscribe now and never miss an episode?